listener production.
Hey, it's Antoinette Lattouf with the Weekend Briefing. So, question, do you know what a pleasure activist is? It sounds, pretty appealing to me because who doesn't like pleasure? My guest today describes herself as this. She's also an author and a sex coach and the co-founder of Normal Co, which sells sex toys while dishing out sex ed as well. Georgia Grace, also known as Gspot, runs a popular Instagram page where she dispels sex myths, unpacks fetishes, and shares a bunch of tips to help people have better sex. Her new book, The Modern Guide to Sex, is out now, and we have a really honest and insightful chat about everything from whether star sign compatibility has an impact on your shag compatibility, as well as her thoughts on the porn stars making headlines for wanting to sleep with as many schoolies as possible. Later in the show, it's the weekend list, and that's where we recommend what to watch, eat, do, and sometimes even tips on what to avoid because, hey, we're generous and considerate like that. But first, here's my chat with Georgia Grace. Georgia Grace, welcome to the Weekend Briefing. I want to start by your title because you have a whole bunch of various impressive things you do. And amongst that is pleasure activist. What is that?
I love that you picked up on that one because a lot of people don't go to that. They go to the other parts. But yeah, I guess as a pleasure activist, I am really talking about pleasure leading a lot of the work that I do. And I do a lot of consent education. I work a lot with trauma. I work a lot in session with individuals and couples. But I guess at the root of it all, it's supporting people in being able to experience more pleasure. And I think we can turn to the Black queer feminists of the 60s and 70s who really are the pioneers of pleasure activism. And they were essentially saying that our bodies deserve to experience pleasure. Of course, deserve to experience safety, but deserve to experience pleasure and rest. And pleasure activism is a big part of the work that I do, which is essentially teaching people about sex so that they can feel better.
I can't imagine, usually when there's activism, there is an opposing force. It'd be like, fix climate change. It's like, no, big business. Or end the war. It's like, no, let's sell arms. Like, what's the opposing force to pleasure activism? Because it sounds like something everyone would be like, hey, where do I sign up?
Well, yeah, they're not really, though. I think it's like shame and taboo and fear and stigma. We can see it in abortion rights. We can see it in slut shaming. We see it in the fear that if we talk about sex, everyone will just go around and have lots of sex, and it's that classic thing, but what about the children? What if the children see this sex education, or what if the children hear about sex? So yeah, we still live in a world where there is a lot of shame and taboo and fear, and I do hear it a lot that it makes sense, right? Like it makes sense to think that pleasure feels good. Why isn't everyone on board with all bodies feeling good and comfortable and safe going into sex? But we do live in a society that's fueled by sexual shame and fear and stigma still.
There is a lot of slut shaming that I witness online a lot. And perhaps it shouldn't surprise me, but it does surprise me when I look at the handles and it's often women slut-shaming other women.
It's a shame, isn't it? And I think that, misogyny and sexism isn't inflicted just by people with penises. And I think that when we look at patriarchy, we need to look at it as a system and the people who it affects. And I also find it really unfortunate that when we see these messages or this harm or this slut shaming, for it to come from other women as well. But I think when we understand these patriarchal forces and we understand misogyny, it's not just one gender who's doing it. It's a system that we live in.
You are also a certified sex coach, and I'm curious as to who your clients are as a sex coach?
Yeah, so I work with somatic sexology, and my clients...
What is that as well?
Yeah, great question. So let's break it down.
Okay.
Somatic is essentially any form of therapy or work that addresses what's going on in the body. So soma is the Latin word for of the body. Sexology is the scientific study of sex. So basically, when we look at different types of therapy, we can sort of break them down to top-down approaches. So a top-down approach would be your classic like psychology or counselling, your classic sort of talk-based therapies. Bottom-up approaches are more of these somatic approaches to working with therapy. And that in recent years, there's been a lot more research that's been done into how we need to address what's going on in the body, particularly when it comes to working with trauma, but of course when it comes to working with sex as well, because when you're having sex, you're using your body. So bottom-up approaches are often somatic approaches. So that's when we will look at how emotions or trauma or fear or the experiences that we feel in our body can support us in understanding how we're feeling or what we're thinking. And an example of this could be when you're anxious, like you often feel the anxiety in your tummy. Or when you're aroused, you may feel heat in your genitals. But a lot of people feel disconnected from their body and they feel disconnected with what's going on. So I guess to come back to your first question, which is who are my clients? My clients are really varied. I work with adults, so that's typically people 25 and older. The oldest person I've worked with has been in their 70s. I work with all genders, all relationship configurations. So whilst I don't work with like a specific type of person, I do work with a few common concerns. So one of the most common concerns I work with is around desire. So that could be, it's called sex drive, really. That's what people know it as. But I would work with desire discrepancy, or when people experience changes in desire, when they've been in a long-term relationship and they no longer want sex with their partner. I also work with sexuality and concerns around that. I work with sexual function, so never having experienced an orgasm or orgasming too quickly, or when their body doesn't get aroused when they want it to. But then also I do, work with trauma as well, because of course when it comes to sex, a lot of people have had painful, uncomfortable, traumatic experiences, and I support them in being able to have better experiences.
You mentioned that you work with all genders and all sexualities, and I wonder if the healthcare system and reaching out for help and some of the patterns there are reflected in what you see. Women are more likely to reach out for help or even go to a doctor, to a GP. They're more likely to seek help for mental health issues. Are you seeing that also replicated in who comes forward to you?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I guess say for example, when it comes to premature ejaculation, so for someone with penis or a man, often they will book in when something's happened. They are instantly booking in. They may have come too quickly, or they may have had a embarrassing experience, as they would call it, and they are booking in straight away. Yeah. So they can be quite reactive to the thing, and they may have a date coming up and they're like, quick, I really need to see you right now. I need support. But then when it comes to desire discrepancy, it's not so much a gender thing that I see, but I see the person who identifies as having lower desire, which often in my clients is, if we're looking at a heterosexual relationship, is the woman. So often it's the person with lower desire who will book in because they think there's something wrong with them. They think that because they love their partner, they're attracted to them, they should just be wanting to have sex with them, and they see a high drive for sex as, the epitome, as normal and as healthy, but a low desire for sex is not. But then, yes, I do also hear it as a kind of common thread as well, as if we are talking about heterosexual relationships, that the woman will say, I really want to talk this through, this feels really important, and often it will be reflected that the male partner is willing, but it didn't come to mind first to book in a session to get support.
You share a lot of really helpful tips on your Instagram page and across social media, and I came across sex myths we should stop believing. Do you have a top two that you'd like to share?
Oh, gosh, there's so many.
Oh.
And I want to hear what you think your top myths are. But I think that, I mean, a lot of people think there's something wrong with them. A lot of people think that they're not normal when it comes to sex.
Yeah.
And I think that this comes down to the fact that we don't speak openly about sex. So if our body responds in a certain way, or if our genitals don't look like the porn star's genitals look, or the model in the swimsuit, then we think that there's something wrong with us. But actually in session, when people say these things that they think they're not normal, then they actually are normal, like they are existing a part of the norm. The other thing is that when people, we're in this sex revolution, I think, at the moment, and it's really exciting that we're speaking about sex more than ever before. But with that has come this, I guess, assumption or this myth that everyone should be excited and willing and wanting to engage with these conversations, or wanting to have sex at the drop of a hat. And that's added a lot more shame and pressure onto people. It's kind of like the reverse swing. And now I'm seeing this vanilla shaming or this mainstream shaming. And yeah, I think that's a myth as well, because sex positivity is all about understanding who you are and what you want and your boundaries, and in saying no, and in saying that you just really like missionary sex, and that's normal too. Yeah, I think there are so many myths, but those are the two things that come to mind for me. What about you? I know that you hear a lot of myths in your line of work.
I would say for me, probably one is that talking too much about sex and consent, and it's particularly to children, is, sexualizing them, and it's going to make them promiscuous. And that is like against what all the evidence and data suggests, that children who are well-informed, age-appropriate, informed from an early age, are far more likely to make informed, good decisions, healthy decisions about sex. And you'd much rather that than them being with a mate, Googling when they're 9 years old, and ending up on a porn site watching something. So there's a lot of hysteria about we are sexualizing our children. It's like, well, no, we are educating and empowering our children, and that's certainly what the evidence suggests. I think the other one for me, and I'm certainly not an expert, this is just my observations.
It's a powerful point.
This is my observation, is that, introducing toys or porn or whatever is, could be insulting to a partner. As though you need add-ons for pleasure or for adventure. And from my conversations with friends of mine who are in long-term relationships, it actually adds to their... And when you have a conversation about it beforehand, it actually adds to their intimacy rather than detracts from it.
Yes, that's such a big one. And I'm so glad you're here to offer those things, because they are really big myths, and they're big myths that I see in session as well. And I think that assumption is that sex should be between two people who love each other, and your bodies should just be these magical vessels that make you climax at the exact same time. But often really great sex is about adding those things like lubes and toys, or exploring things, or adding novelty to your sex life. And that's what people find to be memorable and pleasurable and exciting as part of their sexual repertoire.
Something else that caught my attention is about star signs, and whether you should date someone based on their star sign. And so I'm going to do like a bit of digging for me, because my husband and I are both Virgos. Is that, it's a bit late now because we're already married and have children, but does that spell doom?
Okay, look, so this is, I actually spoke with an astrologer about this for my podcast, and I think I wrote a piece on it, because I am not an expert in star signs. And dating women, you actually are asked on every single date what your star sign is, and it's a big part of like queer dating and queer relationships. So I have no idea.
Okay.
And whilst I don't necessarily personally subscribe to it, I think that what I hear from people is that it can allow for them to have really deep, interesting, funny conversations with people. And speaking to the astrologist, Matt Galea, who I had on my podcast and, who I wrote an article with, basically he was like, if you're two Virgos and everything says that you're not meant to be, but it's working out, then, take it as a grain of salt. But often,
so you're not meant to be together if you're a two.
I don't know. Don't listen to me. I'm not an expert. I'm very, very new to this.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that it basically, like, use it as a point of connection. Often what I've heard when people are talking about their star signs, it's more about, okay, these are the problems that you could encounter and this is how you could work with it, rather than essentially being like, don't date. Although some people may come at us both for saying Virgos should not date each other.
Well, at the very least, let's say it's a good conversation starter when you're dating, and who knows if the stars or the planets or align. Who knows? So I made this little kind of half joke post story on Instagram the other day, where I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do career-wise with my future. I'm exploring all opportunities, and I put a photo of my feet, and I was like, maybe I'll sell pictures of my feet on OnlyFans, only half joking. And then I had all of these people messaging me back going, rookie error, you shared your photo, your feet without charging.
You missed out.
That's a freebie. But obviously, I was kind of half joking. But foot fetishes are a real thing.
Yes, they are. They're a real thing. And so I think like what we could do is we could speak about the difference between a kink and a fetish. So a kink is anything that people would consider to be on the straight and narrow. So think about it like a kink in a piece of string. But of course that's really subjective, because someone might say, hey, I'm into nipple play, and then the other person will be like, that's not kinky. I do that every time I have sex. That's my normal.
Yeah, right.
So it's really subjective. But then a fetish is slightly more nuanced, where people will often say that this thing, they either really want it or need it to be present in a sexual experience. But of course, it's not always the case. Some people can still have like great sex without their fetish being present, and they can still build arousal. But often they place high sexual value on this thing. And with a fetish, it's often something that's not typically seen as a sexual object or a sexual body part. And that's where we see things like feet. And in speaking to people about a foot fetish, they may say a few different things. So it could be the way that feet look. So Lily Allen had a really high score on Wiki Feet, and so she ended up selling her photos on, I think, OnlyFans, I think it was. And she's making a lot of money from selling her feet.
Okay, so it's an option for me.
Yeah,
so I just need to get a high score on Wiki Feet.
Yeah,
okay.
Yes, and you may get some fans from that. So, but yeah, it could be different for different things. Some people like people to wear socks around and get like really sweaty and then post the socks to them. Some people like to watch feet being like smushing creamy cakes, or it's more of a visual or an oral thing.
Yeah, but conversely though, would you potentially have the situation where someone is so into feet that they'll be turned off somebody because they don't like the look of their feet?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think like that's the big thing with sex and attraction, that our attraction is also so subjective. So, it could be someone's feet, but it could also be how they treat the wait staff. It could be how they smell. It could be how they hold their body. I think that the way we figure out our attraction to someone is based on, the whole of them often. And, it might be the other way. They may not necessarily find them like typically their type, but then they see their feet and they're like, wow, those feet.
Yeah.
You're for me now.
Yeah, right. You had me when you took your socks off. Yeah. I'm keen to hear your views on all the headlines around Bonnie Blue. And, the headlines are that she's wanting to sleep with barely legal. And I put that kind of in my air quotes, teenage boys, because part of me is like, well, you're legal or you're not. That's how the definition of the law is. And then having her visa cancelled after a media storm. And then Bonnie Blue and Annie Knight were deported from Fiji for the same thing. The headlines are obviously very attention-grabbing, and they get people very angry. Where's the line between sort of sex empowerment, legality, and also just outright slut-shaming?
Yeah, and this is such a big topic for all of those reasons. So let's kind of separate sex work and have that conversation. I have a lot of clients who have had their first experiences with sex workers, and they have said that it has been one of the best experiences, that they felt safe, that they felt comfortable, that they were able to learn about their pleasure, that there was communication the whole time, and it was a really positive experience for them. I think where this is different is in the marketing of the services and the power dynamic at play, which is the communication of quote unquote, barely legal. They are intending to be controversial. They are intending to grab headlines. We also can't ignore the context of schoolies. Like, these are groups of young children, some of them will be under 18. And I know that they've had discussions around age verification and signing contracts, but consent doesn't work like that. Consent isn't signing a contract. Consent is enthusiastic. It is ongoing. And I think it's really hard or impossible to consent when we are acknowledging the social conditioning that a lot of these boys have around masculinity and sex and what it means to be a part of something and what it means to prove their manhood. And it is taking advantage of these young boys or these young men, these teens. And, I think I also want to ask a few questions, like, who is it for? Who is benefiting? Who holds the power? And as, in a typical sex worker dynamic, there is a client and they are paying for the service. But this is different in that these boys are not paying for the service. They are agreeing to be a part of the production or the filming of it. And what I've seen Bonnie Blues and Annie Knight suggesting is that they are offering education, that they're doing this for the boys, that it's for them, that they get this great first experience. But I think that's really misleading because this is really for them. This is for their PR. They are the ones who are making money from it, and they are essentially benefiting from this. So, yeah, I have had a lot of conversations about this week, and I think that comes from a place of me really always advocating for the rights of sex workers, in seeing that the impact that sex workers have on my clients and how profound and important they have been for many, many, many of my clients. But it has been quite disturbing to see how Bonnie and Annie have been marketing this to create controversy.
You're also the co-founder of Normal Co. And tell me about it and who it's for.
Yeah, so Normal is essentially a sex toy company, but we also create a lot of free sex ed, and we do a lot of research because, let's face it, none of us got sex ed, and there is more and more research coming out, but sex is typically an under-researched space. So my co-founder, Lucy Walk, we work together to create, great sex essentials for everyone. And yeah, we're really proud of the toys that we create. We've recently launched 2 toys with Abby Chatfield. We've got a kink kit and a butt plug, but we also have the cheat kit with Hannah Ferguson, which is all about fucking the patriarchy essentially, and it's a card game and a toy. So yeah, a lot of what we do is we sell sex toys so that we can make sex ed and so that we can have really good conversations about sex as well.
Once upon a time, going into a sex shop felt like a little bit devious, and the location was dubious. It'd be a laneway and some stairs up to a building, and you kind of looked around to see who was looking at you entering. Do you think an organisation like Honey Birdette, for example, who are now in major shopping centres all around the country, you can pop into Kmart and pop in to get your groceries and then pop in to get a vibrator, they've helped normalise or make it more mainstream?
Yeah, for sure. I think that visibility does work to normalize it. A few years ago, it was really radical to even see an influencer talking about sex or promoting sex or coming on board with a sex toy company. And now it's the norm, and a lot of people have attributed the visibility to making it feel more normal for them and more comfortable. There's laws in New South Wales that say that a sex toy store can't be on ground floor, or they can't advertise a toy. But in Melbourne, you can. There are all of these amazing sex toy retailers that you can just walk into. And I walked into one recently, and it was really interesting for me, working in this space. I consider myself to not be shocked by a lot and to be open to a lot, but it was really interesting walking into the store. I was like, oh, wow, I'm walking into a sex toy store, and I came out with my bags, and I was like, wow, I wonder, if people know what I've been doing in here. So yeah, I think it's really interesting to see how when people can see these images, when we can have these conversations, when a toy is just a part of anything like, lingerie or lube or, a part of any other store, it does work to normalize it.
Your new book, The Modern Guide to Sex, is out now, complete with sort of pictures and graphs. It's described as the ultimate handbook for experiencing full body pleasure. What I found quite interesting is the way in which it was separated into kind of 3 sections: self-pleasure, relationships, and then exploring. Why did you do it that way?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to support people in going through a bit of a process, really. And often I find that starting with yourself is the best place to start. And not many of us have been taught how to do that. So in that first section, I talk about touch and self-regulation. We talk about confidence and orgasm and, of course, masturbation. And that is essentially all of the foundational tools that people can explore. And I think that's really important, because often the conversations we have about sex are about addressing the problems or the issues in a relationship. But there's so many people who have a really great sex life with their own body or aren't in a relationship as well. So I wanted to start there. And then the second part is relationships. And there we talk about desire and consent and communication. And sex together and techniques and, a lot of the practical things as well. And I think that is essential because it is addressing the main concerns, which a lot of people come to me and say that they just want to have better sex with other people, whether that's a long-term partner or someone more casual. And then the final section is all about exploration. And essentially that is saying, okay, you've got these tools. Now it's up to you to go and apply it to your life and to explore it on your own. And each chapter is kind of broken down, and there's information and there's research and there's insights and there's tools and there's different therapeutic approaches. But then at the end of each section, I will have what I call a practice and a play section. And that essentially says that if you want to learn about your pleasure, you actually need to apply it. You need to engage with this. And I do that as well because I think there's often like a power dynamic that exists between practitioner and client, or expert and person reading book. And I want to acknowledge that dynamic, but then also challenge it and suggest that every person is the expert in their own body. I am not an expert in anyone else's body, but I do have the tools to support them in figuring that out for themselves. And yeah, it's a lot of my work and the somatic work, which is essentially about, you learn by doing. You won't just learn about great sex by reading a book. You actually have to put it into practice.
Thank you so much, Georgia. This was my first interview with a pleasure activist, and it was a pleasure.
Oh. The perfect way to end.
Georgia Grace, AKA Gspot, and you can check out her new book, The Modern Guide to Sex. It is now your favourite time of the week, the weekend list. Helen Smith's unwell, so I'm joined by one of the weekday briefing hosts. I dare say the quirkiest of the Monday to Friday lot. Chris Spiru, not Christopher, just Chris. What have you got?
Oh my gosh, what a welcome. I love that introduction. I would love you to introduce me every weekday if possible, Antoinette.
Okay, done. I'll just have a chat with Sasha.
Look, my first recommendation, and this is something that is totally out of the blue for someone like me, it is a reading recommendation. It is a book.
Wow.
Now, this is a book that I first picked up while at a Bucks weekend a few months ago.
Strange.
Yeah, we were staying at a really nice Airbnb, and one of the mornings everyone was asleep, and so I thought I'd be considerate and not like make a ruckus, not turn on the spa, not turn on the TV or play music. So I picked up one of the books on offer, and it was a book called Am Pilgrim, and it is by Terry Hayes. It is a 2013 book, and it's all about like spies, and the story follows like this guy who was like the top spy in America or something, and then he has like a copycat. There's a woman out there that's following all the cases that he's been closing and picking up all the strange little quirky things, and so he's challenged with like finding himself. Do you know what I mean? In the spy world.
Oh.
Okay,
and this is fiction?
This is fiction, but it's also like loosely based around fact. So it has some historical accuracies, like it references 9/11, it references JFK. And I love stories that do that like loosely situate you in a historical time, but also like have these little fictional moments. I started to read it. It's a really big book. It's very thick. It's as thick as like Harry Potter 5. So I stopped reading, picked up the audiobook, am halfway through, and am thoroughly enjoying it at the moment.
I also love, Chris, this is so on brand for you. You are recommending a book that you're halfway through.
Yes, correct.
Like, finish it, bro.
Yeah. I next time, maybe I'll do that before recommending the book.
No, I love that. I also love that you discovered it while on a Bucks weekend, which is a pretty unlikely place for a non-book reader to find a book. So my recommendation is if you want to make like a fancy schmancy brekkie for somebody who's coming over, and it's the sort of thing that you could price for like $27 if you were out at a cafe, but the ingredients are simple and actually quite cheap. So all you do is you get some sourdough, you smush some avocado on there, and smushing is a culinary
technical
cooking term.
Yep.
I'm sure of it. Yes, smushing. You smush the avocado on it. Then you get some labneh. And I don't know if you know what labneh is.
I love labneh.
So it is a soft Middle Eastern cheese, and it's essentially made from strained Greek yogurt. So, Chris, it's a little bit of you and a little bit of me.
Yeah, it actually is.
In dairy form. It's thick, creamy, tangy and rich. So then you put the labneh on top of the avocado. Then you sprinkle it with za'atar. Do you know what za'atar is?
Oh, yes, I do.
And then you drizzle it with olive oil. It is so delicious. It looks so fancy, but the ingredients are quite cheap. And I'd love to say that this was my idea, but I follow Sunday Kitchen's Instagram page, and Karima was making it. And Karima is part of this mother-daughter duo, cooking duo. They have this amazing Lebanese cookbook out, and she made it and ate it, and then I made it, and then I made it for some guests, and they're like, oh my God, this is so fancy. And it wasn't fancy at all, and it's delicious.
Yeah, I love this. This is actually something that is almost like a go-to breakfast option of mine at a local cafe run by this amazing Lebanese lady, and she likes to add labneh to everything and za'atar to everything, and so I've been literally eating this almost every single Saturday for the past 6 months. So this is a crazy collision of our worlds here, and I love that you've recommended it for everyone.
What's up next for you?
Okay, so this one is something that I've picked up from the TikToks, as the kids like to call it. It's a new trend, which I think is really healthy, and it's a positive step for anyone who, might be keeping secrets from a loved one. So it's called the we listen and we don't judge trend. So the way that this trend plays out is that you make the announcement, you say, we listen and we don't judge, and then you go on to make an honest, confession. So, for example, people are doing this with their parents, they're doing this with their husbands, their wives, their children, their co-workers. So if I was doing this, I'd probably maybe get my mum in a room and be like, we listen and we don't judge. And she'd go, yeah, we listen and we don't judge. And I'd say, sometimes I can't be bothered to clean the dishes, so I'll just maybe fill it up with water and leave it, knowing full well that you'll come home in a few hours and be super pissed, but that doesn't faze me at all. I'll just go on about my day. And then we'll nod in silence and then say, we listen and we don't judge.
Okay, have you tried that? Because I suspect if I did that to my mother, she'd just screech at me.
Yeah, something that we have in common is that we both have ethnic mothers. Antoinette, do you think I've tried this with my mum?
No, it sounds like I can hear the fear in your voice.
So if you were to do this at home, what is something that you would like to say? We listen and we don't judge. What is something that you would, confess to your husband or your kids?
Oh, my kids, I've got a good one for the kids. I'm like, darlings, we listen and we don't judge. Mm-hmm. You know a lot of the artwork you bring home from school, and I tell you it is wonderful. Within 24 hours, I chuck it in recycling, but put it under the milk carton so you can't see. But, darling, we listen, but we don't judge.
We don't judge. Yes, well done. Yeah, I recommend every listener do this, film it, pop it up on TikTok or tag us, send us a DM at The Briefing Podcast. We would love to see you guys doing this.
So I just want to know, do people do it and not be judged, or do they get really bad reactions?
Oh, just if you go and just search this trend and you study the facial reactions, there is a lot of judgment, and I would say there is a lot of listening. There's a lot of listening, but there's also a lot of judgment. And this is why, I'm absolutely loving it.
I'm going to do it and I'm going to share it. Okay, my second recommendation is Fisk. So season 3 is out now.
Yes.
It's an ABC comedy. Do you watch Fisk?
Yeah, it's with, what's her name with the curly hair? I love her, the comedian.
Kitty Flanagan, a national treasure.
Yes.
She deserves a statue.
Mm-hmm.
I love her. So if you haven't watched it, it's based on Helen Tudor Fisk, and her life crumbles in Sydney. And I love, she goes around telling everybody that her husband left her for an older woman, a line that she just keeps repeating, which I love. And she starts working at a daggy Melbourne law firm. It is hilarious. It's brilliant. Great dialogue. Fantastic characters, really smart but subtle social observations about people of different generations and work cultures. It is just laugh out loud humour. And we weren't sure if season 3 was coming, like after 1 and 2. It's out. It's hilarious. And I don't know if you know this, Chris, but she struggled to get it made in the first place. Like she had this idea and she couldn't get it commissioned. She couldn't get it made. And it's not only a massive local ratings winner, but it's also really popular abroad, because sometimes I wonder with Aussie humour whether it will translate. But it was top 10 on Netflix in 10 countries, including South Africa, the United Kingdom and the US. So I just think she is brilliant, and this form of humour is brilliant.
Yeah, and if there's anyone who's like, kind of sold but not totally sold, there's a huge lineup of people that are in this series as well. Like there's Aaron Chen, that really young comedian. He's so funny. I think he plays the receptionist, right?
Yeah, he's so awkward, but he's so funny.
So funny. And then you've got like Marty Sheargold and Julia Zamiro, and it's just like, I think, what do they play? They play brother and sister, hey?
Yeah, brother and sisters who are also partners in this law firm, and they are equally hilarious. It's gold. It's comedy gold. So if you haven't seen it, you can check it out on ABC iView. Must watch.
Absolutely. Oh, I love these recommendations. I hope everyone takes something away from this.
You know what? I hope they all take away the listen but don't judge. Because that's just content gold.
Yeah, it really is.
Thanks, Chris, but that is it for this week. Thanks so much for being with us and tuning in. It is always a pleasure. If you want more of the Weekend Briefing, find us on the Listener app. Download the Listener app in the App Store, follow us there, or you can follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. And why not give us a rating and a review for this fabulous interview with Georgia Grace? If you're feeling generous, you can rate and review every episode, and do try that Listen and Don't Judge. Share it with us. We'd actually we'd look into putting a compilation of some of our listener best hits and best reactions. And we will be back Monday morning, where the team will have the latest headlines straight to your headphones, along with some interesting interviews. Stay safe, everyone.
Listener.